right, this week we're going to talk about influence in negotiation. So let's get started. I'm going to share my screen here. So, what about that negotiation? Or influence in negotiation and influence. Um, this is chapter 9, influence, and we're coming to you from the book Negotiation by Roy Lewicki and Bruce Berry, as well as David Saunders. It's a McGraw-Hill book, and so I want to make sure that we give credit where credit is due, not my book. So influence. So let's talk about this. So there are two routes to influence an organizing model. Traditionally, it was thought that an effective influence occurs when a person acts in accordance with the message. An alternative suggests that two paths of persuasion, the central route occurs consciously and integrates the message into the person's cognitive structure. And then number two, the perpetual route, which occurs automatically, leading to attitude change without argument scrutiny. So, effective influence is not just a way to claim more value for an individual or company. It can help persuade the other to see joint benefits and increase their satisfaction with the deal that ultimately results. All right? So, message content. Let's look at this. So when we're making an offer attractive to the other party, we have to use the perspective of taking the ability to understand the other party's needs. Then we frame that message so that the other party will say yes. So we find something that the other party can agree with, putting them in the mindset of saying yes. So we make that message normative. And so in order to make that message normative, people are motivated to stay consistent with their values or their self-image. So, or we could suggest an agreement in principle. And so although desirable when other options are blocked, it still takes work to turn such an agreement into one with details and action proposals. So the message structure, there are one and two-sided messages. So when persuading another party, people really may ignore opinions and arguments in supporting the other party's position. A one-sided approach, the boomerang effect, would boomerang the effect if easily refuted. So a negotiator may describe opposing views, then show how their view is more desirable. This is a two-sided approach. These are generally more effective overall, best when presented last. So most effective when the other party is well educated, initially disagrees, will hear arguments against the position, and the issue is familiar to that individual. So that's the approach that works best there. Now, research shows us that behavior change is more likely when exposed to a one-sided message rather than a two-sided message. And so advantageously refute counter arguments with two-sided arguments. Continue with message structure. There are components, repetition, and conclusions. Factoring a large proposition means breaking it down into smaller, more understandable bite-sized pieces, all right? So include statements the other party has already agreed with, and then similar parts allowing log rolling, bundling, or trade-offs. What am I going to give up in this? So repetition encourages central route processing. Only repeat a point a few times. Avoid being counterproductive. So letting others draw their own conclusions may be effective as long as it is the conclusion you want them to draw, as well as those with strong views may fall prey to confirmation bias. On balance, draw its explicit conclusions for listeners. So influence, we can see the riots on the Capitol or some of the other things that happen, how people get influenced It could be a individual that has a lot of persuasion and influence. I watch the Apple TV series, The Morning Show, and Jennifer Aniston. She has a lot of pull, and I read the reviews and I read the posts and the tweets and stuff, and I see how her influence overrides everything, even though she is playing a probably horrible character, this Machiavellian character in the show. And so I find it quite interesting what we'll accept. So persuasive style. So how to pitch the message. Encourage active participation in order to pitch the message. Active approaches require receiver efforts leading to involvement, which leads to attitude change. Consider vividness and intensity of the language. Increase intensity with metaphors, swear words, or change in tone. Yes, swear words really does work sometimes. I know. It just works. Use threats, incite fears. Threats emphasize points and are not as often as you expect. Or how a threat is constructed and delivered determines the effectiveness. I remember on one of the shows, I think it was episode 6 of this season on the morning show, the lady says, her name is Sybil, the character is Sybil, and she says, hey, listen, I'm going to be around here a while. I'm like a cockroach. And when the bomb goes off, I'm still going to be alive. And so she used this metaphor of the roach motel. When you set off the bomb, the roach bomb, the babies scatter about and they die. But the cockroach, the big roach, the mama bear, she's not going to let somebody get her, so she gets away because she knows already. She has already sent her kids in front of her to do the dirty work of terrorizing somebody's home, and she's out there somewhere else doing other things, so because she can reproduce later on. So she used a threat in this particular case, Sybil did, to get things done. Now, violate the receiver's expectations. Arguments countering self-interest are persuasive, use moderately. Perpetual routes to influence. Effective when receivers attend less to persuasive actions and are susceptible to automatic influence through subtle cues. So, what could be some subtle cues? I think that in the example I just gave you of Sybil, the character in the morning show, she used some subtle cues. She told her she was part of Frick and Frack. And if Frick and Frack is an old term that my mom them used to do. Don't be like Frick and Frack, meaning don't be together, because if you go together, you're gonna die together. And or go down together in this particular situation. So perpetual persuasion does not change attitude. It's a short term and vulnerable to counter influence. So we now consider 3 sets of strategies: message aspects, attributes of the persuader, the message source, and elements of the influence context. So aspects of the message just foster perpetual influence. It includes message order. Familiar topics should come early to achieve the primary effect, and then uninteresting topics at the end to achieve recency effect. Format: certain appeals of effectiveness may depend on the central or the channel or format. Written rules carry more weight than verbal ones. And then distractions: people start forming counter arguments when perceiving persuasion. So using distraction while delivering the message may lessen this. So source characteristics and credibility. There are many factors that contribute to source credibility: qualifications and expertise, reputation for trustworthiness and integrity, self-preservation or presentation, status differences, intention to persuade, associates or persistence, and tenacity. So there are source characteristics of source attractiveness as well. So enhance personal attractiveness in several ways. friendliness, integration, likability, helping the other party, perceived similarity, emotion. And so I think that a lot of times in this particular one, source attractiveness, when we're trying to persuade somebody, we may use a woman that in that particular scenario, because she's going to show more friendliness, she's more likable, especially if she's attractive, as in the case of Jennifer Aniston. She's a very attractive lady. And so I think a lot of people fall into that and are going to go with what she says. But in this particular session or series, she's also, like I said, Machiavellian. So source character authority. Those with authority have more influence than those without. A negotiator may use little such as doctor to show authority. There are two broad uses of authority in influence seeking. They are authority based on a person's personal expertise or credibility, and there's authority based on a person's legitimate position in a social hierarchy. And so the first is a soft influence tactic. The second is a harsh tactic. Okay? So authority based on person's personal expertise and credibility, that's soft tactic. And the harsh tactic is authority based on a person's legitimate position in a social hierarchy. So the leader of the company may come across in that authority, it could be harsher than others because that person is in charge. So when dealing with authority figures, ask two questions. Is this authority truly an expert? Or how truthful can I expect this expert to be? Aspects of context that foster perpetual influence. So reciprocity, negotiators make concessions and expect concessions in return. And commitment is usually incremental and difficult to combat. Social proof. Dilute this by identifying false information and giving it proper weight. Scarcity is difficult to combat when used effectively. And reward and punishment uses resources in two ways. Exchange involves the use of promises and commitments as persuasive tools. And then pressure is the use of power through threats of punishment. And we talked about power in the previous session. So use changes by situation, especially in cross-cultural negotiations. So the role of a receiver's target of influence. Receivers are not passive recipients. There are two prominent aspects to their role and options. The first is that their targets should avoid becoming defensive or direct their energy to understand the goals behind the influence attempts. And second, there are ways to resist attempts at influence. So understanding the other's perspective. So explore the other's point of view and then use it to your advantage. Explore with well-crafted questions. Be careful of questions that attack rather than explore. All right? Don't attack, explore. Selectively paraphrase things. This ensures both parties understand each other accurately. So paraphrasing helps move the discussion forward. Reinforce points you like in the other party's proposal. People are likely to repeat behavior that is rewarded. Acknowledge support point through nonverbal signals and compliments or encouragement. So resisting the other's influence. Now, have banter and know how to use it. A good banter is a source of leverage. And we talked about banter early on in the process. To be used effectively, the other party must be aware of it. Make a public commitment. Sometimes negotiators want the other party to make public commitments, but not always. And then inoculate yourself against the other party's arguments. And you do that by preparing supporting arguments for your positions only, develop arguments against your position only, and counter arguments, and develop arguments both for and against your position. I think the best negotiations tactics I saw was in a movie with oh my gosh, where the great debate. where this Texas school was arguing and coming up the ranks in the early years where blacks weren't allowed to mix with whites. And these kids from a historically black college were arguing kids at Harvard. And they made some great, even though it was a debate, the negotiations during the debate process were awesome. And the instructor was telling them how to get through these arguments and what it took. So always develop arguments both for and against your position. And I picked that up from that great debate. And that's it for this chapter 9 McGraw-Hill book on negotiations. We'll see you in chapter 10.